video, we're gonna look at part 2 of replicating Alice's red court dress from the live-action Alice in Wonderland. Last week, we explored the details of the underbodice, the understructure of the dress. You can find the link for that down below in the description. So today's video is all about the petticoat. And this petticoat is made up of many yards of tulle, both in red and black. This petticoat isn't just for under the dress. It's a white sheer with black stripes overlay fabric that we'll talk about next week, goes over the dress and opens up so you can see this front of the petticoat. The back is all covered up by that fashion fabric, but there's a good amount in the front that's seen. Before we get started, I wanted to mention that there is about 70 yards of tulle in this petticoat, and you could probably do with less. I had some trouble with making it too large. Even now, I think it's a little poofy compared to the original dress, but I'm gonna deal with that and I'll be okay. But if you're planning to make this, I would say you need less than 70 yards. Before we go on to ruffling all the tulle and assembling it, I did make 2 base underskirts, and you really only need 1. I decided to do 2 just because, I don't know why. But the black skirt is 20 inches long, and the red skirt is 16.5 inches long if you're interested. And this is just to keep, first of all, for comfort, because the tulle can be quite scratchy. And then also it's for visibility, because up here at the top, it does see through to the red layer skirt because there's not much tulle up here. Down here, it doesn't matter, but up here, you definitely have some visibility in there. So I made those. It's a basic circle skirt pattern. Hemming technique, which is in my ebook, which explores 6 different ways to hem circle skirts. The link for that is down below. So it was pretty basic. I made those skirts, hemmed them, and then I attached them to the underbodice. So pretty basic, and that is actually another reason why I'm glad I used just a plastic boning for the underbodice, is because I can sew along that waist area and I can just sew right through the bones, whereas steel boning or synthetic whalebone, I wouldn't have been able to do that, and it wouldn't have been as easy to attach these skirts. So that is another plus for using plastic, but again, I do prefer using steel, but as I mentioned in the video, which you can learn about more, I decided to go plastic boning. So now that we've attached the underskirts, we can go on to ruffling the many yards of tulle, which by the end of ruffling them all and then assembling it, I was going quite crazy. I don't know how I made 6 Cinderella dresses, because there's a lot more frills in there, and I'm about to make another one, which makes me question my decision, but it's happening. It's just, this gave me a little taste of what's to come with the Cinderella dress. But I got through it, it's finished, and now I realize I didn't have to do as much as I did. I didn't have to ruffle it all. So first of all, tulle is probably my least favorite fabric material. It's not my style, and it's really annoying to work with. But it does have 2 favorable qualities. And the one quality that I like the most is that it's very cheap. I got 40 yards of tulle for about $15. Which is really nice. When you put 70 yards into a petticoat, it didn't cost a fortune. But it's annoying to work with, but we'll talk about that later. But the next one, it's light and it gives great volume. Sometimes too much, and that's actually a quality that I dislike sometimes, but it does give good volume. So when you need a lot of volume, I tend to use it. And with this dress, I do believe a majority of the fabric was tulle. So one of the not so favorable qualities is that it sticks to pretty much anything. It sticks to each other, it sticks to you, and It's not my favorite to work with, but I managed, I got it done, and I can't wait to go on to the rest of the bodice. So about halfway through this process, I was kind of getting discouraged because it wasn't turning out the way that I wanted it to turn out, and I was kind of worried that, well, first of all, I was using too much tulle, and it was getting very poofy and fluffy, and I just didn't see how to make that better. But as I got to the end and I made some adjustments to the petticoat, it made it better, and as of now, I'm fairly happy with the result. I still think it's a little poofy, but we're gonna deal with that. So now that you've got a little introduction to tulle and it's not very fun qualities to work with, let's go on to working with all that tulle. So my first step was to cut about half of the yardage, and so I had a 40-yard bolt of red and a 40-yard bolt of black. The method I use for cutting out all this tulle is to align the folded edge. I just do a back and forth pattern to gather up those layers. And so I match up all that folded edge, and that gives me a nice edge to base my strip width off of. So the raw edge, I don't worry too much about smoothing those out and aligning those edges, because with the width of my strips, I have about 3 to 4 inches of extra fabric that just gets trimmed off, so I don't worry too much about that edge. With frills, it doesn't matter as much if you know they're a 1/4 inch longer, at least in my opinion, maybe in yours it is, or especially when you're working so much. Once I had about 20 yards of each cut out, it was now time to start ruffling. Now, on my 5th Cinderella dress, I discovered the ruffler foot, and it saved me so much time and really made the frills look better. I used to use a gathering foot on my Bernina, but it was just more tricky to work with and to get the tension right and such, and I just didn't enjoy working with that gathering foot. But when I discovered the ruffler foot, the result was much better, in my opinion. And so I have an industrial machine that I can put that ruffler foot on, and I just leave it on there. That's where I run all my frills through. If you've used a ruffler foot before, you'll know that it's quite loud. There's a lot of clicking and clanking involved, and it's also a combination of how my machine is. So I grabbed my Bluetooth earbuds and put those in and listened to the Cinderella soundtrack. And no, this is not Cinderella playing in the background. I wish it was, but copyright, so. I discovered about halfway through the process a better way to ruffle my ruffles. So with the petticoat design, I have 2 ruffles attached, and then off each of these ruffles, I have 2 more attached. Most of the under petticoat is red tulle, and only the bottom edge is black. What I discovered I could have done, which would have saved time, is to ruffle 2 pieces of tulle together at the same time, just align those edges and run them through the ruffler. It makes the process quicker because you're ruffling 2 pieces of fabric at the same time, but also when you go to attach that ruffle to the petticoat, it's easier to line up that one edge of ruffle instead of aligning 2 edges of ruffle and then sewing it to the petticoat. So that is something I discovered would work better for the whole process, but I didn't discover it until later. And then also, I would recommend not ruffling your ruffles as tightly as I did. That was one of my main problems with the under petticoat, is with how large it got, is I just ruffled it too much, and by the time I got to that end black ruffle, there was so much volume down there that I had to adjust it some. So I would recommend not doing it as tightly gathered or ruffled. So that is something. that you can learn from me. Now that I've got most of my ruffles ruffled, I can go on to assembling the petticoat. I constructed this petticoat in 2 sections. There's an inner petticoat and an outer petticoat. The outer petticoat is this part that has more black mixed in with it. Most of the under petticoat is red tulle and only the bottom edge is black, as I mentioned earlier. And I based this design off of this picture here. Now, if you compare this picture compared to this picture, you'll see the outer look of the petticoat is not the same. And that's what got me thinking, oh, this must be a 2-part petticoat. So on this picture, it was just the under petticoat, and here you can see the distinct lines where the tulle or whatever they used was attached together, and then only the bottom ruffle is black. But then in this picture, you see the black mixed in the middle and such. So that's what made me think about the 2 petticoats. I do have 2 diagrams of how I constructed the petticoats, and I put them up here so you can see them, and you can of course pause and look at them more in depth, but I also have the link to them down below in a blog post if you just wanted to go over there and download it or whatever. But this is how I constructed my petticoat. In the next part of the video, I don't do much explaining along the process of assembling the petticoat because it would just be a bit directionally challenging maybe and just hard for me to explain what I'm doing. So I would recommend just watching as I assemble. So here goes the video of assembling the petticoat. It is not fully complete of every little minute of assembling the petticoat, because much of it I was very frustrated with tulle and I did not want to deal with video equipment at that time. So you'll see snippets of assembling, and again, look at the diagram. And for now, without further ado, here we go into the tulle abyss. This much tulle is a lot to get around your machine, and here you can see my struggle a little bit. It's very large. It's not as large as the Cinderella dress, of course, but it was still very challenging to work with. But I managed, and it's here before our eyes, so it did happen. So the final step was to attach both parts of the petticoat and then attach the petticoat to the underbodice. I did decide to attach it all together just to make it easier. I didn't feel like having a separate petticoat was necessary, but it was a little tricky to get that in the machine and to sew all the way around, but it worked and I got it done. So here is the petticoat after I attached it to the underbodice. It's quite poofy and large, and it really isn't my favorite. Even though I minimized the design as I was going, it just still was very poofy. So I decided to try my best to minimize that and to kind of work the material into each other to get it to lay tighter and more compact. My method for reducing the poofiness is represented in this time lapse. I first smoothed all the frills, And then I brought my industrial iron in and gave it a lot of steam to try and just reduce some of that. I tried this method of basically tying down the petticoat. And I used leftover strips of tulle. I went around the neck of my dress form and then down through the caged part of the dress form and then back up. And while I was doing this, I was making sure that my petticoat was lying in the right place. I didn't want to pull up the petticoat or anything and make it wrinkle weird. I made sure all the layers were laying smoothly and hanging down, and I made sure my string wasn't affecting that, but at the same time was containing it and pulling it all together. Once I got all those tulle strips attached, I made sure again that all the frills were lying in the right place, because the next step, I used my industrial iron again and I just gave it a lot of steam and heat so that hopefully the tulle would soften and then harden back up as it cools in this compacted version of the petticoat because of all the strings. So that was my theory. I then just let it sit there for about 24 hours. It wasn't anything precise. I just let it sit. And so I opened it up, and I think it worked. It's not as poofy, and I also like that these strips kind of gave these interesting texture to the petticoat. I don't know if that'll stay like that for long, but I like it for now. But anyways, that was my method for trying to compact an extra poofy petticoat. And we now come to the end of this video. I hope you maybe picked up some tips and tricks along the way for working with tulle, and hopefully not as much my dislike for tulle, because yeah. Anyways. Sure to leave a comment if you have any questions or just comments. Give this video a thumbs up, and then also subscribe to my channel, because next week we will be completing this dress with the outer draped fashion fabric. And now go out into your own sewing area, learn, create, and inspire.